Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to another indie book review. It is another one for Indie April, and it's a repeat author, an author whose work I have reviewed before, which is always nice because then I have at least a little bit of an idea of what I'm getting myself into. And in this case, I reviewed And Then We Vanish by DH Schleicher. And I still struggle on saying his name. Anyway, this was an author I've reviewed before. I reviewed the very dark historical serial killer novel, and then came Darkness, and I loved that. The backdrop of the 1930s depression with a serial killer revenge story on top of it worked together so perfectly. So I knew this was probably going to be dark. Now this is a short story collection from a decade of work, as the blurb explains, and you can kind of tell that some of them are a little older, and I'll mention that in a second. But anyway, these are all themed more or less around the idea of vanishing, maybe temporarily, or maybe permanently, or, you know, that those ways that humans can just seem to totally lose track of each other, seemingly without warning. Now, for the most part, it was really intriguing. I loved a lot of the stories. This is definitely one of those books, and Schleicher's previous work was a bit the same, where not many of the characters are what you could truly call likable, but they're all interesting. In fact, I can really only name like 3 stories from here off the top of my head out of the 11 in here that I could like truly say, yes, this main character is truly, utterly likable. And like, let's see, there was the lesbian couple with kids, loved them. There was a little boy in the last story, Benjamin, loved him, and I forget what the third one was. But I'm not one for whom that's a necessity. I don't need all of the main characters in the stories to be likable, like purely just have it be, you know, interesting. It still needs to be interesting, but even if they're a bad person. And I liked that it definitely felt like short stories. I've noticed a lot that my tastes for short stories are very specific, because if I can look at the concept for the story and see 20 different ways to take it, then I struggle to see it as a short story. Instead, I see it as a not fully fleshed out novella, or maybe even a novel, depending on the size of the story. But these all felt like short stories. There was definitely a lot of ambiguous endings, which kind of goes along with the general gist of the whole thing. You know, when people vanish and disappear, it is open-ended, so that I didn't mind too much, although there was 1 or 2 where I was like, you could at least given like some kind of hint. But beyond that, it worked well. Not every single one of them necessarily directly applies to vanishing, in that in some cases, like, you don't see someone vanish in every story, but like you might see these 2 people meet and they separate, and you know without a doubt that they're never going to see each other again. It was like a ships in the night meeting type thing. So that does, it makes sense, because again, this wasn't a short story collection written to be a short story collection. These are all curated from an already standing body of work, so you have to allow that like not every story is going to perfectly fit in with that, but I did appreciate it. So I was well on track, maybe not from the very beginning, but to give this a 5-star, because I gave Schleicher's previous work 5 stars, but in this case, there was one thing that prevented that, and that is the general presentation and themes of social media. Now, books in general have a struggle with presenting social media, mostly because publishing is so much slower, even indie publishing to a certain extent, than social media or the internet in general. Even indie authors who can publish prolifically will have their books already start to feel outdated within like 2 years tops. So it's very easy for things to become outdated. But more than that, books also struggle because so many times their themes or takes on social media boils down to, it bad, don't post online. Like, that's kind of the entire gist of it. And this book had that, Not necessarily in spades, but it was definitely there. Multiple different stories had social media as a different aspect. And in every case, the person in the story that was obsessed with social media was always a woman, usually in her 20s to, I think in one case she was in like her 40s. Always obsessed, always posting things that no one cared about. And you could tell that it was dated because in one story, it kept mentioning again and again that, oh, she couldn't share her whole feelings in 140 characters when Twitter hasn't had 140 characters as its limit in like 2 years. So you could tell that that short story at least was published or written more than 2 years ago. So in that aspect, it was already notably dated, but also just the concept. Like, we as a society have come to accept, especially in the time of now, that social media is just a part of our lives, and it's not inherently a good or bad thing. It's just a thing. And for every instance of cyberbullying or, you know, people using their anonymity for bad, there's cases of, you know, that group of guys that plays Halo together becoming best friends and going to each other's wedding. Like, one of my closest indie author friends met her through Twitter. Like, a lot of cases, social media can be used for good, and especially when it's an indie author, because, like, if it's an indie author, Twitter is your biggest selling platform. Like, so you should be at least relatively accepting of social media as a tool. And I was actually I tweeted about this take, and the author replied, and he's like, yeah, I've got some other books where the take is different. So you can kind of tell that these aren't necessarily his currently held beliefs on social media, but because it's centered around women as the ones being obsessed and frivolous with it, and B, really kind of a stale and outdated take, I had to knock a star off for that. But in general, it's pretty good. Like his other work, most of it, as far as I can tell, is either contemporary or historical. In one instance, it gets a little bit surreal, but I kind of liked it. However, for the most part, they are very serious takes. A lot of the grown adult white men in these stories aren't fantastic either, but they're not fantastic in a way that shows that you're not supposed to think they are. So I kind of let that one slide a little bit. One in particular, what was it called? What was it? I don't want to like ruin the surprise. Oh shoot, what was it called? Somebody you used to know. That story had the least likable character of any of them. And some pretty bad stuff happens in other ones, but he was just Anyway, his story was also the most interesting, but that's the thing where they're not likable and they're not necessarily good guys, but you're not supposed to think they are. And there is some aspect of diversity in there. Like I mentioned before, we have the family with two moms. We have character, you know, there's one story focusing on a black woman and another one focusing on, not focusing on, but a kid finds out that his friend likes boys, like that kind of thing. So there is some diversity in there, and it is self-aware when the jerkish, I can't swear anymore, straight white dudes are being jerkish straight white dudes. So I appreciated that. Overall, again, this needs to be something that is exactly to your taste. I know a lot of people don't necessarily like short story collections. I like them because it feels like it goes by faster. Because I read this in a day, so it's already kind of quick. And it's only about 166 pages, I believe. And as you can see, it's smaller than a regular sized book, so it goes by pretty fast. But just the nature of short story collections tends to make you feel like you're moving through them very quickly, because you're like, wow, I finished a whole story and it's only been 15 minutes, which is very nice. I appreciate that. Actually, I think I might have finished some of these stories in less than 15 minutes because some of them are like under 10 pages. But regardless, if you like that kind of thing, super serious stories with deeper themes and not necessarily likable, but always interesting characters, then this is definitely the short story collection for you. So thank you so much for watching. I hope your Indie April is going as well as anyone's April can. At this point, I am open to review requests once again, have been for a hot minute now, and if you would like a review like this one, please let me know. I will have my email down in the description below. I will also have my review policy down there, so please give that a read through. It answers a lot of questions and saves us a lot of time. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.